powerful steroidal hormones that we call a vitamin, which is not a vitamin, that's called vitamin D. And we understand that vitamin D is an anti-inflammatory in the sense that it downregulates inflammatory gene expression. There's not a cell in the body that does not have a vitamin D receptor. But vitamin D is right down there in that trough. Vitamin D, it's called a VDR down in that trough. It's called the vitamin D receptor there, where calcium is flowing through the lumen of the small intestine, and hopefully it's ionized through your good digestive processes, which started up here in your stomach with lots of hydrochloric acid. Lots of hydrochloric acid. 60 to 70% of the people who have acid reflux don't produce enough hydrochloric acid. And it's one of the #1 selling drugs, whether it's prescription or over the counter, on television, because it's so doggone uncomfortable to have, gastric reflux. So Tums, Rolaids, the purple pill, Pepsid, I can't even keep up with it, how many we have over the years, to neutralize that hydrochloric acid. And it's extremely important to understand that we are monogastric animals. We don't have the advantage of fermenting things upstream. It goes right from mouth to gullet. And we got a pH down there, hopefully, of under 2. Now, the pH scale is what we call an earthquake logarithmic type scale. Every increase in 1 point of pH or decrease in 1 point of pH is a factor of 10. So if you increase the pH of your stomach from 2 to 3, you've diluted it tenfold. Now that's really important to understand. What's the purpose of a low pH in the stomach? To tear apart protein and to start ionizing minerals. Minerals are hard to absorb unless you ionize them. And you ionize them with hydrochloric acid for starters. You also tear apart protein with hydrochloric acid. Well, if the GI tract is an immune organ, and if we're worried about pathogens like viruses, bacteria, yeast infections, what are they made out of? What is the constitution, chemical constitution, biochemical constitution of a bacteria or a virus? Protein. They're all proteins. And you're exposed to the environment more where? Here, right? Nose, mouth, unless you have wounds on your skin, the infiltration of unfriendlies inside is through the mouth and the respiratory tract. So it's very important to have a barrier, a boiling pot of hydrochloric acid that keeps these pathogens from surviving. And interestingly enough, the other organisms that we've eaten over many eons of time in our foods have co-evolved to become resistant to this hydrochloric acid pot, and they pass through to the small intestine where they colonize, and that's what we get in our fermented foods. Lacto-fermented foods like kefir and yogurt, and kimchi, and sauerkraut, and miso, and whatever else. These are the foods that survive that and end up down here, plus all the metabolites that stimulate the growth of those indigenous organisms that are in there. So it's understanding why this gut is so important and why the surface area there. Because if you go to the next step, you can see down on the right, this is a vascular organ. You see the blood vessels that are in those villi? Just removing the epithelial away, and what you see is these veins and arteries there. Massive exchange of stuff going on there, of taking in there. And that's why that ruptured gut on the top really is a problem. That's why ulcers, and if you look about it, I mean, that's what I'm speaking at Acres this year, is the gut, health from the gut up. This is the same thing as the root system of the plant, health from the gut up. Diverticulitis, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, Yonis in cattle. It goes on and on with people. Irritable bowel syndrome. And everybody seems to be talking about it. And the reality is we're not going to fix that problem, with more Band-Aids that ultimately don't fix it, because if you don't fix the gut, you're going to make your health worse, because this stuff is going to get in that vascular organ that it is, and now you're going to end up with things that you feel are allergenic foods. I think a lot of people who have allergies have leaky gut syndrome. also known as dysbiosis. That's what they have. You got to seal the gut, you got to heal the gut, you got to put out the fire that's in there. And then the immune system starts to come back. You don't inhale these poisonous materials while the gut selectively takes in the nutrients that are necessary to build healthy cell walls and a very functional DNA that expresses the right kind of genes, so you don't have all these weird symptoms and you don't have chronic malaise. So this is just a computerized version of fractal geometry. It can go on indefinitely. Massive surface areas are really important to create interaction, biological, biochemical reactions. So whether you're looking at the root ball of a plant, whether you're looking at the gut of an animal, sand, silt, clay, that's where we're back to it again. It all is based on creating opportunity, biological opportunities. Coral reefs are an example of that. Savannas are an example of that. This is, this could be Africa, or it could be Texas, it could be Florida. Hedgerows in England, which we're trying to bring the hedgerows back, are another example of that. Surface area. More opportunity for things to happen with animals, insects, birds. Back to saw this, your farm tour magazine. Somebody up there is talking about protecting their farm from pests using bats. Very interesting. It would be great to see that. Rainforest, it's all about, diversity with surface area. Deserts, people think deserts are sterile. Not even close. Not even close. You know what that stuff is there on the desert sand? That's called cryptobiotic crust. There's a word. Cryptobiotic crust. You know what cryptobiotic crust is? It's algae, bacteria, and fungi in one, kind of like lichen. You know what lichen is? It feeds on a rock, right? That's what cryptobiotic crust. Very, very high in protecting the surface area of the desert so it doesn't blow away, and conserving moisture so that the higher plants like cactuses have access to water. The desert's incredibly, not surprisingly, elephant standing in the room, the desert's incredibly efficient at conserving moisture if you don't destroy it. Taking dune buggies on that destroys the cryptobiotic crust, and it starts to rip up like a carpet, and it's hard to get back. It's a very brittle environment, very fragile environment, but the high desert ranges are the same way. 12 inches of rain is a desert. That's a desert. You go up into the high plains, where all the buffalo used to run, should not be torn up and put into wheat, should be back in grassland. It's called a brittle environment. It needs a lot of biology opportunity. And you can't get biology when you have carbon that's standing up in the air, blowing away, just turns into carbon dioxide. It needs to get mashed down, stomped on, pooped on, peed on, and made contact with topsoil so microbes can now turn that stuff into carbon that we call humus and organic matter that sucks the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, builds up humus, holds moisture, and starts the whole system over again. So this, I can spend the whole day on, and I'm not. Aren't you lucky? This is the rumen schematic, and all this talks about is how efficient a ruminant is, and I talked about it earlier. Like an earthworm, it takes cellulose, energy that's useless, and ferments it and turns it into volatile fatty acids. Like I said, the energy, 80% of the energy of a ruminant, this is why it's so important to remember this. If you're a grass-fed customer, you're a grass-fed producer, you want to make a lot of volatile fatty acids in that rumen there, because they go right into the bloodstreams without even going down to the lower gut. When you put an animal in a feedlot, you're not producing vinegar, propionic acid, butyric acid. You're producing lactic acid. Anybody hear of lactic acidosis? If you're an athlete and you run, for example, or you lift weights, you get muscle pains. What is that pain from? Lactic acid accumulation, right? When you feed ruminants grain, instead of them producing these alkaline producing volatile fatty acids, they produce acid producing lactic acid. You can actually alkalize an animal that has acidosis with vinegar, because it has 1/10 the molar